FIFA president Gianni Infantino finds himself in some incredibly hot water right now, right after his disastrous, highly controversial proposal to sell off a massive stake in the World Cup completely collapsed. Angry fans and soccer officials are already demanding his immediate resignation. Now, your initial reaction to all this drama might be to say that you do not care about international soccer. Well, honestly, you are in luck because I do not care much either. But let me explain exactly why you should pay close attention to this specific scandal, because it is not actually about the sport of soccer at all. No, it is really about raw power, backroom corruption, and the hostile takeover of major public institutions by greedy global elites, or what we might colloquially call complete corporate vultures. This entire saga, though it looks like it is just about sports on the surface, actually reveals far more about our modern society today than almost any major political crisis or government scandal. That is precisely why this massive corporate power struggle is so incredibly fascinating to unpack right now. So let us kick things off right now. Yes, that is a sports term. Hopefully I used it correctly. This is the story of the man who tried to sell soccer. To be perfectly clear, I am not a sports fanatic myself. For me, a center back sounds like that spot on my spine that aches whenever I decide to stand up a little too fast. But thankfully, I have a brilliant team of researchers working hard behind the scenes to make absolutely sure we deeply understand the dangerous intersection where massive global politics and high-stakes sports collide. But do not worry at all if soccer is not really your thing, because we are going to zoom out as this story unfolds to look at a whole lineup of shady figures across several different industries. For now, though, let us start with what was essentially a massive corporate business proposal. Let us cast our minds back to late July. The United States had just wrapped up hosting a World Cup that was commercially the biggest ever, pulling in a record-shattering $15 billion as its total revenue. The powerful president of FIFA, Gianni Infantino, was riding an absolute high, but just like the legendary Icarus, he would soon fly way too close to the sun, and that sun happened to be a Kushner private investment fund. On July 28th, Infantino suddenly unveiled an ambitious new investment proposal for the World Cup called the FIFA Forward Enterprise, or FFE. The plan itself was quite simple. FIFA wanted to bundle its entire commercial empire and massive event operations, which included lucrative corporate sponsorships, brand licensing, and day-to-day tournament organization, high-priced ticketing, hospitality, and global broadcasting rights directly into this new FFE entity. FIFA would keep majority control, but they wanted to sell up to 20% to outside private equity investors. If everything went smoothly, they would raise $4.2 billion on a $20 billion valuation. The primary investor was lined up to be Thrive Eternal, a powerhouse firm owned by Joshua Kushner, who is the brother of Donald Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner. Big-name advisors included Disney chief Bob Iger and media executive Greg Baffey. Now, as they rolled out this massive proposal, FIFA desperately wanted to make one thing very clear. They insisted they were not selling the actual World Cup. Private investors would have zero power over the official sporting rules, and FIFA would keep 80% of the board. According to them, the fresh cash would be used to develop soccer all across the globe, depending on what you call it. It made perfect sense on paper, but in reality, it made people absolutely furious. Almost immediately, the plan faced massive backlash. Critics argued that once you let private equity cash in, you inevitably transform the World Cup into another greedy, corporate, for-profit enterprise that nobody actually asked for. It felt like an incredibly slippery slope. Sure, maybe these private investors would not have real institutional board power at first, but fans argued that keeping it that way over time was about as likely as a casual observer memorizing the offside rule overnight or explaining who Cristiano Ronaldo is to a non-fan. Other critics slammed the proposal on pure principle, arguing that the World Cup was never Gianni Infantino's to sell in the first place. They were merely caretakers of the beautiful game, which is a crucial distinction to make here. FIFA is not supposed to operate like a typical global corporation. They are officially a non-profit association that just happens to generate billions of dollars in revenue along the way. But lining the pockets of private shareholders is completely against their core mission, which is why so many people got so angry. The powerful regional soccer federations, representing different countries, openly complained that they had been completely blindsided by the deal, and Infantino gave them almost no time to actually review the fine print. It was aggressively framed as a take-it-or-leave-it deal, with a tight mid-September deadline for member associations to fall in line and sign on the dotted line. Behind the scenes, these associations were promised massive cash windfalls if they voted yes. Millions in development funding would completely vanish if they did not sign in time. In his open letter, after promising a $10 billion payout, Infantino told them that in exchange, all he required was their continued trust. And if that sounds like a blatant corporate bribe to you, you are definitely not alone. Member nations could either fall in line and get $40 million or refuse to sign and receive a mere $10 million instead. This tiny window for debate felt like a classic high-pressure sales tactic to almost everyone involved. It was like a shady car salesman telling you this deal is only good for the next hour. If you hesitate for even a second, you lose everything. But if this really was an attempted bribe, it did not play out how Infantino expected. Soccer federations around the globe absolutely lost their minds over it. Massive governing bodies like UEFA, which runs the entire European game, and the AFC, managing everything across Asia, were instantly on high alert. And CONCACAF, the group overseeing North American soccer, openly accused Infantino of dirty deception and a massive, unforgivable breach of basic trust. Whispers even started spreading that European teams might boycott the upcoming World Cup entirely. That meant the planet's absolute best soccer nations would be completely missing from the tournament. The only real drama left would be watching Brazil and Argentina fight for the trophy. Since a World Cup without Europe is basically worthless to sponsors and TV networks, the big European power players easily crushed the entire deal. Within just 3 days, a defeated Infantino completely withdrew his grand proposal. But if this were only about Infantino making a complete fool of himself on the global stage, we would not even be talking about it. No, what makes this story so incredibly fascinating is the way it shines a harsh light on how raw power and corruption operate in modern society. And honestly, when you want to look at deep-rooted corruption, very few organizations on this planet can compete with FIFA. The endlessly broken carousel. But here is the most crucial thing to understand. FIFA was already completely and utterly broken long before Infantino even entered the frame. For decades, the governing body of soccer has been known as one of the most shamelessly corrupt organizations on earth. In 2015, a United States investigation exposed a 24-year culture of corruption. We are talking about top-level soccer officials pocketing well over $150 million in bribes and kickbacks just to sway votes. And then, of course, you had the absolute joke of the World Cup bidding wars, where totally unqualified countries won hosting rights through some of the most secretive and shady deals imaginable. A tiny, non-traditional soccer nation like Qatar hosting is easily the most infamous example. But letting Russia host in 2018 was a dark throwback to Mussolini using the tournament in 1934. And I am sure that all those endless billions of dollars in oil and gas money had nothing to do with those choices. So the organization's reputation had been totally destroyed for years, but things got much worse in 2016. That was the year Gianni Infantino swept in, running for president on a platform where he painted himself as a noble reformer. He promised to be the savior who would bring back basic honesty and pride to soccer, rescuing the game from the dirty scandals of the past. But as it turned out, Infantino was actually much worse than his predecessor. While some saw him as a potential savior, others knew he was just the newest villain on the carousel. Behind closed doors, though, Infantino was far more destructive, and we need to make this distinction very clear. Old-school FIFA corruption was mainly about simple bribes. It was about power players lining their own pockets through shady backroom deals and secret handshakes, completely ruining the integrity of the sport. Infantino's version of FIFA, on the other hand, was like stripping the copper wiring right out of the walls for quick cash while the whole house burned down. For instance, in 2017, barely a year after taking the job, he quickly fired the independent heads of the ethics department, Cornel Borbeli and Hans-Joachim Eckert. At that exact moment, Borbely and Eckert were actively investigating hundreds of open corruption cases, and their abrupt firing marked the death of any real reform. So much for the great reformer. Then, in 2018, Infantino started pushing a secret deal to bring in $25 billion of outside investment backed by SoftBank to completely restructure the game. It fell apart after facing massive pushback, especially from UEFA. And that might start to sound pretty familiar to you. But his other big strategy was quietly building up a network of incredibly powerful allies, both inside and outside the soccer world. See, FIFA has 211 member nations, and everyone from a soccer powerhouse like Argentina to tiny San Marino gets exactly one vote. It looks incredibly democratic on paper, but a major part of Infantino's playbook was to dramatically increase development funding to these local associations. He loves calling it democratizing the game, and to be completely fair, those smaller cash-strapped nations genuinely do need that funding to survive. In some places, that funding has honestly done some real good. But from a political standpoint, it gives the FIFA president incredible power over a huge portion of the voters. I mean, if you are a tiny federation relying on that money to survive, why would you ever bite the hand that feeds you? And the blatant corruption was still happening right out in the open. FIFA rigged the 2030 hosting arrangements, splitting it between South Africa, Europe, and Africa. Under FIFA's strict rotation rules, that clever move meant that only soccer federations from Asia or Oceania were allowed to bid for the 2034 tournament. Saudi Arabia emerged as the only official bidder and won easily, though FIFA insisted the process was completely thorough, while furious critics pointed out that the rushed timeline and rules essentially handed the entire tournament to Saudi Arabia on a silver platter. Away from the pitch, Infantino started cozying up to billionaire oligarchs and wealthy foreign governments. And this is precisely where the President of the United States enters the picture. Trump and Infantino are, by all accounts, very close buddies. The heads of FIFA and the United States have been spotted together constantly over the last couple of years, forging a deep personal relationship that is undoubtedly wonderful for them behind closed doors, but one that is potentially highly corrosive for soccer. Trump in particular has increasingly come to view soccer as just another high-profile arena where American executive influence can assert itself. Look at 2025, when FIFA created a brand new peace prize out of nowhere and immediately handed it to him, reportedly because Trump was absolutely furious about being passed over for a Nobel Prize. It was never clear if any other candidates were even under consideration for this award, and nobody seems to know if a 2026 edition will ever exist. Or just consider the 2025 Club World Cup, where Infantino was caught on camera presenting Trump with a replica trophy from the tournament. The American president even stood right on stage alongside the actual champions. Then, we have the sheer drama that went down during the 2026 World Cup, an event that proved exactly how much direct control the Trump administration held over the entire tournament. When Iran qualified, 15 key members of the Iranian Football Federation were flatly denied United States travel visas, forcing the entire Iranian national squad to set up their base camp in Mexico instead. Then there is the case of Somali referee Omar Abdulkader Artan. FIFA had handpicked him as Africa's premier official to oversee crucial World Cup matches, and despite holding a perfectly valid visa, security officials blocked him at the border on national security grounds, yet not a single shred of evidence was ever produced to justify it. In both instances, Infantino claimed FIFA was completely powerless, arguing that they cannot override United States immigration decisions. Although, many suspect that if the roles were reversed and Morocco decided to deny player visas in 2030, Infantino would not stay so quiet. And then we have Folarin Balogun, the red-hot star striker of the United States national team, who received a highly controversial red card, prompting Trump to personally call Infantino to demand the automatic one-match suspension be thrown out. Infantino admits the phone call happened, but insists he never interfered with the independent disciplinary committee, a process that miraculously ended up working out entirely in Trump's favor, lifting the suspension just in time for a massive knockout match against Belgium. A game that the United States squad, by the way, ended up losing 4-1. all of this matters deeply because Infantino was not pitching his massive new project to just any random group of wealthy investors. The primary financial backer was a venture firm run by Jared Kushner's brother, and as you might expect, they stood to make astronomical amounts of cash if this massive new project succeeded in making the World Cup a more frequent event with new ways to monetize the sport. So, is it just a massive coincidence that this entire scheme would have funneled millions straight to a member of the extended Trump family? Well, I will let you decide. This is not about soccer. Look, the real problem here isn't just about soccer, or even about Trump himself. It is that FIFA heavily markets the World Cup as an event completely above politics, but the 2026 tournament proved that the host government ultimately wields very real, coercive power over it. Under Infantino's watch, the World Cup has effectively transformed into a massive playground where global geopolitical power, astronomical wealth, and FIFA's personal interests all collide. Look at it this way. If you are in Infantino's shoes, when does having direct access to the world's most powerful elites translate into real influence over them, or even vice versa? When massive institutions revolve entirely around one single individual who is actually left to police those boundaries. Because the way Gianni Infantino has consolidated control feels far more like an absolute dictator seizing total power than a trusted official carefully stewarding a beloved global sports federation. He crushed internal opposition, dismantled all major guardrails on his authority, built a system of loyalty bought with cash, and cozied up to the global elite. With those critical checks and balances gone, he was completely free to make highly controversial decisions governing the very organization that regulates a cultural obsession for billions of people worldwide. Is it really any surprise that he tried to milk this cash cow until it was completely dry? While past corruption at FIFA was measured in millions of dollars, Infantino's operation is measured in GDP percentage points. Of course, Gianni Infantino could not just pull this off entirely on his own. Most of the official rules within FIFA still remain intact, at least on paper. The federation still has formal statutes, strict ethical codes, governing councils, official voting procedures, and independent committees that are supposed to have a say. It features regional confederations representing thousands of officials alongside governance requirements they must legally follow. Case in point, that massive new FFE proposal would have required majority approval from the member nations, which completely explains that $40 million cash incentive designed to sweeten the pot. But none of this, as we keep telling you, is actually about soccer. It is about how this deep-rooted crisis inside FIFA perfectly mirrors the deeply flawed world we find ourselves living in today. A world where the ultra-wealthy and politically connected, operating through global financial networks and elite circles, have used institutional corruption and shady backroom deals to reach a point where they do not even bother hiding their greed anymore. Instead, they actively flaunt it right in the public eye, openly and brazenly, going so far as to brag about it directly to the media. This is not merely a symptom of Trump or Infantino, or, for that matter, any other leader across the globe who relies on these exact same tactics. But rather, it is a symptom of a modern world where power and money are so deeply concentrated that the global elite do not even pretend to care. Maybe we are stretching the point just a little bit here, but it really seems that Infantino's takeover of FIFA is not too different from the way a modern autocrat systematically captures an entire country, removing those who could independently investigate him and systematically pulling down crucial guardrails, handing out highly lucrative gigs to his loyal supporters, and concentrating absolute power in a single person's hands, while simultaneously keeping the checks and balances alive strictly on paper. Well, that is a playbook that pretty much everyone from Viktor Orban to Donald Trump has enthusiastically embraced, meeting with varying degrees of success. Right now, an important thing to keep in mind here is that this does not mean our only option is despair. Infantino's big plans came crashing down because he clearly overreached, deeply angering some of the most powerful soccer confederations on the planet. Consequently, not only is Infantino's presidency now in very serious jeopardy, but so is the deeply entrenched FIFA monopoly over the beautiful game, especially as UEFA and other regional bodies explore fresh options to establish their own rival global soccer tournaments. It is sort of like how Viktor Orban came to realize only far too late that he was still ultimately answerable to the Hungarian electorate. So too does Infantino seem to have discovered over this past week or so that he is not some absolutely powerful king. As for where exactly things go from here, that is still a completely open question. As of August 11th, the influential Asian, North American, and European soccer governing bodies are doing absolutely everything they possibly can. They are publicly accusing Infantino of deception, demanding an independent investigation, leaking scandalous stories about his mistress, and calling for his immediate, outright resignation. The embattled FIFA president faces re-election in March of 2027 at the 77th FIFA Congress. Just a couple of weeks ago, he was an absolute shoo-in, but this entire massive scandal with the FFE has seriously damaged his chances. Of course, Trump has since weighed in on this too, publicly backing Infantino by declaring that FIFA would be making a truly terrible mistake if for any reason they even considered replacing Gianni Infantino. He is absolutely fantastic, having just presided over the single most successful World Cup by 4 times ever presented. If he is gone, the tournament will never be as successful or highly profitable again, which you could easily see as yet another symptom of this bizarre new world order, where the Trump administration constantly tries to weigh in on major elections everywhere, from Hungary to Brazil to FIFA, with highly mixed results. But Infantino, in short, has not been defeated. Not yet. CONMEBOL, South America's governing confederation, and CAF, the African Confederation, are still generally supportive of the president, even despite all of these massive scandals. And in the immediate aftermath of FFE's collapse, Infantino summoned senior FIFA officials to Morocco for a kind of bizarre loyalty test, and they all passed. That alone tells you what an incredibly steep uphill battle UEFA and other regional bodies will be fighting to remove him. The truly absurd thing is that no one following soccer wants any of this. They just want to be able to watch the damn match, and ideally follow their favorite team all the way to the finals should they make it, without paying absurd amounts of cash just to make distant corporate investors ever richer. But honestly, that is true about so many different aspects of modern life, like the Albanians protesting against a pristine nature reserve being turned into a 5-star luxury resort they will never be able to visit, or British water company bosses making millions while flooding the nation's rivers with raw sewage. There is just this nagging feeling today that the world is completely rigged, that life for most everyday people just keeps getting incrementally shittier, while the wealthy global elite concoct wild schemes to inflate their massive bank balances at the expense of regular folk. Infantino's outrageous FFE pitch may have been particularly egregious, but he is far from the only offender out there, and passionate soccer fans are far from the only victims. He just happens to be one of those very few examples who overreached so dramatically that it may yet all come crashing down in spectacular flames around him. At which point, the investors at Cushman's firm will simply pack up and move on to the next shiny thing. Thanks for watching.